Hey everyone, welcome back to Winden and welcome to 1986. Today is the first episode of transitioning the town of Winden from 1953, which had been the previous episodes, into the 1980s. And to start, pretty much the obvious build, at least anyone who is a fan of the show Dark, it has to be the nuclear power plant. So as you can see, this is what we're going for. That's a view that's pretty common from the show. And I was really trying my best to line up, like camera angles, kind of planning out cinematic shots and such, just making sure everything was oriented the proper way. And yeah, it was a little harder than anticipated because, of course the city's not lined up the same way as it is in the show, since in the show there really isn't much of a city that's shown. But yeah, so I was just trying my best with what I had there to line up the shots and such. And I also decided to use not I think it's Dole's nuclear power plant pack, which it's like the best nuclear power plant pack on the workshop. It's got pretty much everything from the cooling towers, the reactors, to generators, such stuff like that. But the cooling towers are absolutely massive, and I'm sure they're properly to scale, but it just didn't fit at all here. I mean, literally, like having two of those cooling towers, placed side by side, the really big ones, they were almost like their footprint was about maybe a quarter the size of the town. And so, when zoomed out, of course, seeing everything in one picture, it looked really kind of odd. So I decided I found some very simple cooling towers on the workshop. And the one I optioned to use was definitely a lot smaller. I mean, no joke, it's about the quarter the size of the one in the Dole's nuclear power plant pack. But nonetheless, obviously, it's still plenty large. And I'd say, based on the views I was looking at, as I said, trying to line up camera angles and get similar views as in the show, these definitely look to be more, the proper size, at least as seen in the show. So I decided to go with those smaller ones, although they are less detailed, and I converted them to PO just to, kind of change the color since they were quite bright, and the texture has, well, no texture, more or less. It's basically just a solid color, so there's not much to it. So that's one downside, but compared to the massive Dole ones, I think it's the better option. But to start out, I wanted to lay down the entrance, and as you can see, I initially had some prop gates, which were good. I liked them and all, but they were pretty tall, and they were also they had little supports coming off the back, so they looked a little weird, I guess, even though they are still nice assets. They just didn't seem very good in this spot. So I decided just to use those gate networks, which looked fine. I mean, worked out well. And once again, I'm using the new parking lot networks, which I absolutely love. As I said in the previous episode, I miss building parking lots, so it's definitely nice having not built any really parking lots in pretty much over a year since, Berlin Noir and everything else. No need for it. So yeah, I'm trying to, basically use these roads and networks as much as I can. And as you can see there with the entrance there, it's kind of nice because you can make a single lane right there, kind of go into a double lane, for the entry and exit there, which turned out pretty nice. So I liked how that turned out, and I added just a few armed guards to the front of the power plant, since I don't believe in the 1980s, at least in the show, I don't know about real life, but in the show they didn't have any armed guards in the 1980s. They did when it was in modern day, but I think it adds a nice little detail. It makes it look a little more cooler, since I'm pretty sure any nuclear power plant today will have some sort of armed security at the entrance or around the perimeter. But so now we are laying the reactors, which are those two circular buildings, and then the other buildings with the smokestacks and such. I don't know, I'm just going to consider those to be like the generator and all the stuff that actually converts whatever to the actual electricity. Of course, what I'm doing here is probably not super accurate if you know anything about how nuclear power plants function. But it was hard to, because, I was, of course, referencing as much as I could the actual power plant from the show, but there weren't really any views that were very good of the power plant, at least to get actual details and actual accurate locations of all the buildings. For the most part, you see these two, big cooling towers and the steam, coming out of it, and that's pretty much it. And the actual power plant is not real. The one in the show is just completely made from CGI. So, I was trying to look at other nuclear power plants on like Google Earth and stuff in Germany, which fortunately for me, looking at Google Maps, Germany doesn't blur out their nuclear power plants on any sort of Google Maps or anything. Unlike, I know, for instance, France does. You'll just see a pixelated little blob kind of, which, makes sense. I get it. But yeah, it was definitely nice to be able to actually see some more realistic actual power plants. But nonetheless, again, I'm not going for a super accurate power plant. I just want the general feel of one. Since if you do want a super accurate nuclear power plant, then, watch the Pripyat Chernobyl series I did, because then that one was actually quite accurate. I referenced diagrams and stuff of the actual power plant, so I pretty much placed everything, where it was supposed to be. But yeah, also in the show, one thing that I always noticed when watching was there was never any sort of cooling pond, or it's not located next to a river or anything. And based on all the images of the power plant, there doesn't seem to be any sort of water nearby really at all that I could see. So I was considering putting some sort of man-made pond just nearby, since from the vast majority of nuclear power plants, and really just power plants in general, are located next to some sort of water. So whether that be the ocean, a river, a lake, whatever it may be. But nonetheless, there are still, examples of some power plants that don't actually, have any sort of body of water nearby. For example, I live in Phoenix, which, for those who don't know, it is a desert. So we have a nuclear power plant nearby, and it just has some small little man-made ponds, which, are, of course, for cooling down the reactor and the steam and such. But yeah, so those are above ground, but I assumed that there's probably some, power plants somewhere in the world in which you probably have some underground reservoir of some kind, which cools down the actual power plant rather than anything above ground. So ultimately, I decided to not build any sort of pond or anything like that, and just keep it as close to the show as possible. So yeah, if you're wondering why there's no sort of water, that is the reason. But yeah, so moving on. Once again, I'm building another sort of, I guess, intake for materials of whatever kind. This building has the garages again. It's a pretty nice little asset there, and I just added a big old just parking lot in the front, which I do detail in a second, I believe. Mostly just for trucks and stuff, to come in and offload their whatever it is they have. And this is another building that I use from the nuclear power plant. And as you can see, I scaled it down a crap ton. And I wanted something to stick there in the middle with that little smokestack. And as you can see, I'm kind of looking around it, trying to check out to see if there's anything that looks weird being down or scaled down so much. But with that asset, there's no doors on it. There's a couple little garage doors, which when scaled down like this, they kind of just look like normal doors, for people rather than actual cars. So I'm like, okay, it looks perfectly fine. The only reason you'd think it looks weird is knowing that it was scaled down so much. So yeah, I just did that, since again, I wanted something there with that smokestack. And then revisiting the front here, I wanted to add some sort of, security booth or something just for, people who are working the security. This would probably be where they go to check in, whatever, debrief, whatever it is. But Yeah, I actually used a vanilla asset since I thought it, kind of looked like it, like the general architecture of that little small building looks kind of like it'd be from the 60s or such, since it's kind of got that feel to it, at least for me, whatever. But yeah, again, you might notice that the picture is slightly jerky, and that's because I forgot once again to slow down the simulation. So one thing I should give a shout out to the Discord for helping me out with the steam. So there's like steam and smoke props and like a little fire prop, which is just some vanilla thing that came with the game that you see on buildings, whatever kind. And for whatever reason, in my game, both basically any save that I have, so even in Berlin Noir, as well as when I did Chernobyl, and of course now into this series, I don't have those props for whatever reason, which really sucks because they're pretty nice, And of course, when building a nuclear power plant, unless your power plant is offline, you need some steam coming out of the cooling towers. So fortunately, like I said, shout out to Discord. They helped me out. They gave me a move it export of the steam, so I was able to, in the end, you'll see in the cinematics, go back and add the steam. But yeah, the reason why the simulation was sped up again was because I actually tried to use the asset editor to give myself, that steam prop, since you can't just, place down a vanilla prop in the asset editor and save it for whatever reason, it's unfortunately. So what I was doing was I just scaled down a random building to basically be as small as possible in the asset editor, and then I just put a little bit of, one thing of steam on top of it. So I tried that out, but I was having difficulty, and of course, since it's an actual building, that means it, conforms the terrain around it, so I was getting issues with that. So that's when I asked Discord to help me out, and they did. And another odd thing, which I guess hopefully it stays this way, but once I actually imported those, the move it export into my game of the Steam, apparently that triggered something in the game to be like, oh yeah, that's something that's supposed to be there. And now, for whatever reason, I have the steam and smoke and fire props back in the game again. I can search them and find it. No idea why that happened, but I'm not going to complain, since they're very nice little assets to have, again, especially for something like a power plant when you need it with the cooling towers. But yeah, so that's why it's jerky, because I had it sped up, because the steam moves really slow in the simulation. But that's, I believe, going to end pretty soon. At least the sped up simulation, since I think I just add some paths around here, and then after that I believe I exited out of game and came back in and reset the simulation speed to be much slower, so it's much better to watch. But yeah, and I remember the days when that simulation, that mod that allows you to adjust the speed of the simulation didn't exist. And I remember even with Berlin Noir, at some point I didn't have that mod, so I had that super jerky, time lapse for all my videos. So it's amazing anyone actually wanted to watch that. And another thing I wanted to mention regarding the power plant, a number of you said in like previous videos while we were still in 1953 in the town, that I needed to, build the construction site for the nuclear power plant. Since yes, while in the show Dark, there was some sort of construction site back in 1953 for the power plant. If you actually, look up, more of the details, the power plant didn't actually begin construction until 1960. So that's why I didn't, actually do anything for that in the previous videos. Since, in reality, it wasn't really much of a construction site. It was just more or less a pile of dirt with, a few excavators and such, some cars around, but nothing really else more than that. So that's why I didn't actually include anything in any of the previous episodes. However, I will go back at some point, off camera, since, it's not much, just some pile of dirt, like I said, and, add something to it, since, once we get to the cinematics, once we finish the series, and I do the final cinematic videos, you know, I do want to do a comparison between all 3 years. You know, and of course, in order to do that, I need something in 1953 for the power plant. And I also went ahead and made that one sign that's very prevalent in 1953 that shows, you know, the nuclear power plant wanting to be built. It's like has the picture of that one family who the guy ends up running the power plant and all. So I made that simple little prop, and so I'll definitely build that. And that was something simple that I could include, so I definitely wanted to do that. So again, that's why I didn't actually include that in any of the previous videos, but don't worry, I will build it eventually, and it will be in the very final cinematic videos. So anyways, moving on, we did previously just a second ago, I was making an office building, which would be, you know, more administrative stuff, so not actual workers for the power plant, but, you know, dealing with all the whatever crap you deal with in the administrative side of working in a power plant. Don't know, but that's where they would work. But yeah, again, we're back to this one little area here where I said we were going to redetail. And yeah, just laying down some truck props. And actually, I think the truck that I used there, not the trailers, but just the truck itself, I think that's an actual American truck from 1980s. But you know, trucks in the U.S. now, they don't have that flat front. They have, you know, a kind of normal car front. You know, it's not flat, I guess. And you know, whereas in Europe, they're pretty much all flat. Of course, you know, space is a little more. Stuff's a lot more confined in Europe. So obviously, every foot counts, or every meter counts, I should say. I don't know. So I did include those since they're from 1980s and they have that kind of European look to it. And I didn't see any actual European trucks from 1980s. So yeah, I think it worked out all right. And then no idea what this building is here, but it has some steam coming out of it. Looks like it belongs in a power plant. So I went ahead and included it there as well. But as far as detailing for the power plant goes, I didn't do too much since, for the most part, you know, there's not really much in power plants besides the actual buildings. But the very final aspect of detailing is this here, and this is, of course, from the show Dark as well, when a younger, rebellious Ulrich, it's implied that he, after Chernobyl, since this is in 1986, the series, of course, you know, a town living next to a nuclear power plant, understandably, you know, there might be some worries, so, you know, he spray painted "No Future" in front of the nuclear power plant at the entrance. So just this little guy here, that little thing there is supposed to be some sort of mop or something, you know, trying to wash away the paint. But yeah, just that's a little detail that's from the show that I, of course, had to include for anyone who's actually seen the show. But so moving on from that, that's going to be it for the actual power plant. And what we got going on here is something that needed to be, you know, built for a while. So this is a little island that sits in the river that runs through the town. And I hadn't built anything on it at all during the 1950s in any of the previous episodes. And I initially was considering putting some industry here, at least back, you know, for the 1950s, since, you know, that made sense, I guess. You know, of course, you know, some river or some boats going upstream up the river, you know, dropping off supplies for the industrial building. So it made sense to have something there that would be industrial. But for whatever reason, I tried a couple times just trying to, you know, placing some buildings down, kind of planning things out, and nothing really ever looked right. So I decided, you know, it's not a big deal, since I was going to eventually get rid of all that stuff that I built to, you know, upgrade it to do some housing and stuff. So I just decided to just throw trees down on the island and just wait until we got into the 1980s to actually build anything. So that's where we finally are. So I decided to, like I said, build some sort of, you know, fairly modern, at least relative to the 1980s, residential buildings and such. Those two buildings that I placed at the very start, I believe they say they're from the 1970s, and they're actually East German buildings, but, you know, they have that general feel, which, again, there's not really many 1980s West German assets on the workshop. since pretty much anything from this time period is exclusively East German. So I got to use a few of those that could reasonably be in West Germany. So I feel like that building there makes sense. And then those two taller buildings there on the left side of the screen, I believe the asset creator said those are from the 1900s, early 1900s, I think, somewhere in France. And then these buildings here that I'm placing, I don't know, they kind of match the general architecture of the other buildings, I suppose. I don't know. Needed something there. I didn't want to keep reusing the same buildings. So yeah, I use those buildings. And this is an area that I'll probably update as well when we move into the modern day. Since at the left side of the island, I built a very, very simple park. And it's not really a park, it's more just like a plaza with some grass, I guess, which I didn't include in the video since nothing special, and I plan on getting rid of it in the modern day. And you'll see it in the cinematics and such, but I'll build some new apartment buildings or something there. You kind of got a glance of it in the top left corner if you saw that. But yeah, so I still plan on updating this island a bit. For instance, also, I will probably get rid of that parking lot, or at least scale it down a bit, just to fit in some more buildings. But just like the vast majority of the town, this isn't based on anything in the show Dark. This is again just building whatever I want, since, as I think already mentioned in this episode, the actual town of Winden in the show is pretty much never shown. Just very, very, very few locations, and most of it is indoors as well. So, they didn't really have to have a town in the show, actually be shown on screen at all. So, yeah, that's why I'm pretty much doing whatever I want for the actual town, just trying to make it, realistic to some average Western Germany town. Although, when I was building this little island here, I was looking for, towns along rivers that would have something similar to this. And I didn't really find anything, at least of this size. However, the only town that I did find that had something somewhat similar to this was Magdeburg, I believe, which, that would have been in East Germany. So it has some of those, Soviet-style apartments, which I guess some of these are kind of similar to, since again one of those assets are actually a East German apartment. But yeah, so I was going for that kind of feel, even though this city is in West Germany. But from what I've learned from some of you, that even though there's of course big with the architectural and city planning after the war, even though there's obviously very big differences between East and West, there were still some similarities with these, kind of large apartment blocks like this, large multi-family homes, apartments, whatever you want to call them. So that's why I wanted to build something like that. And, it looks nice in the very end. It turned out well. And I didn't do super fine detailing with this. I mean, for the most part, as you see, I just laid some simple paths and just some little planters there with that little outdoor cafe kind of park thing. And I did lower the keys there on the one side a bit to be a little closer to the river, since I wanted some sort of terrain difference, just to make it a little more interesting. And I did as well drag a path, invisible path along there, so a few people do actually walk down there, which I wasn't actually really expecting. I put down the invisible paths kind of expecting no one would use it, or very, very, very few, which not a lot of people use it, but at least some do, so that's, turned out pretty cool. But I also, on the other side of the island, so right here, I guess as we're getting into it, I wanted to make, I was thinking about maybe doing some sort of monument of some kind, but I decided just to do, some sort of little park area, just some grass, kind of with a little funky shape, and then just some tables there, probably a nice little area, right, for going on a picnic or something like that, and just some benches that go along this. I'm sure it's got a nice view of the river and the town as well. So yeah, I like how overall this area turned out pretty good. But yeah, so that's going to be pretty much it for today's episode. And I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Definitely like the video if you did enjoy, and if you're new, subscribe, as there will be much more content on the way. And yeah, let me know what you want to see for the next video in the 1980s. We'll still be in the 1980s, but yeah, let me know what you want to see built or changed, and I will do my best.